Welcome to the debate. You know, when you walk onto a movie set, there's that initial moment of pure illusion.
Oh, absolutely.
You look up and you see this grand storefront, intricately carved wooden doors, beautifully weathered brickwork. But if you take a few steps around the side, the illusion completely breaks.
Right, because you suddenly realize it's just 2x4s holding up a piece of painted plywood.
Exactly. There's no plumbing behind those walls. There's no concrete foundation.
It's just a facade built exclusively to look good for the camera in that exact fraction of a second.
But when you walk into a real, century-old house, you can physically feel the weight of the architecture. The floorboards creak because generations of physical weight have actually settled on them.
Yeah.
The pipes run deep into the earth, drawing water from a real reservoir. There's an underlying structure that exists, and it functions whether someone happens to be looking at it or not.
And that structural integrity, or, well, the potential lack of it, is exactly the fault line we're examining today.
It is, because in our previous discussion, episode 17, we looked really closely at the elemental art system.
Right, we did.
And we landed on a very specific conclusion. We agreed that real, hard boundaries do exist within that system, but the visible cost of wielding those powers is just incredibly unevenly distributed across the characters.
Yeah, we saw that starkly. I mean, you have the kinetic recoil fatally crushing the Fuse Master.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just an absolutely brutal biological consequence, while other characters just seem to glide right by without paying anywhere near that same toll.
Right. But pulling at that thread naturally forces us to look at the larger tapestry, because the elemental arts are intimately tethered to the physical environment and, well, the biology of the continent itself.
Uh-huh.
So when we look at Picodesh, are we looking at a movie set or a century-old house? How deep does that environment actually go?
That is the big question.
Today, we're asking, is Picodesh a fully realized world, or is it just scenery built to serve the plot?
And just to be clear, we are grounding ourselves exclusively in the text of Book 1 by Neo Gentrics.
Yes, exactly. Strictly Book 1. I will be arguing that Picodesh is a meticulously crafted, fully realized world.
And I'll be arguing that it is merely underbuilt scenery designed solely to facilitate the narrative.
All right, we'll lay it out. Why do you see it as just scenery?
Well, grounding ourselves in the text, I have to say, this is where the seams in the plywood really start to show for me.
Really?
Yeah. When I read Book 1, I just don't buy the scenery. To me, it feels completely underbuilt. It is literally a theatrical stage designed solely to facilitate the narrative momentum of the main characters.
See, I am on the complete opposite end of the spectrum here.
I figured you would be.
I look at Picodesh and I see a fully realized world that functions on deep, internally consistent physics. I mean, I see a living, breathing ecosystem where geopolitical power is inextricably tied to biology.
But if you step back and look at the continent objectively, almost every location the reader sees only springs into existence at the exact moment the plot requires it to.
I don't think that's fair.
I mean, let's start right at the beginning with Sacar.
Okay, let's talk about Sacar.
Sacar exists strictly to hide Xeonix. Once he leaves, it provides absolutely no broader cultural footprint. It's fundamentally hollow.
Wait, hold on. That hollowness you're perceiving, that isn't a lack of world building.
How is it not?
That is the world building in action. Sacar's extreme pacifism, its aggressively boring, mundane nature, that isn't Neo Gentrics failing to write a vibrant town. That is a 20-year trauma response.
A trauma response by his parents, certainly.
Right.
They are hiding. I get that the pacifist mandate makes sense for the family unit, but the town itself, think about Xeonix's daily life there.
He's incredibly frustrated, yes.
He is whittling wood, he's doing mundane chores, feeling stifled. The town exists solely as a boring, static backdrop to justify his teenage angst and his desire to venture out.
No, that's just...
The moment Xeonix steps off his family's property, Sacar completely ceases to matter. Where is the local economy? Where is the unique culture? It's just a generic sleepy town trope, painted on that plywood we just talked about.
No, I really have to push back on that because you are ignoring why it's so quiet. Going back to our analogy, Sacar isn't a painted theatrical backdrop. It is a meticulously maintained quarantine zone.
A quarantine zone?
Yes. Think about the mechanics of the world. Eon Pax is hunting the kinetic potential of the Xeon bloodline. He systematically eradicates any biological threats to his empire.
Sure, the stakes are real for the family.
Exactly. Xeonix's parents deliberately engineered a microenvironment on the absolute furthest outskirts of the Orion lands to keep his kinetic signature entirely off the grid.
I hear what you're saying about the parents' intent.
The lack of a cultural footprint is a survival mechanism. Any ping on the radar, any grand martial display or bustling economic activity would instantly bring Eon Pax's forces down on them.
Okay, but Neo Gentrics writes town so thinly that it practically evaporates the second the protagonist's house is burned down by Crater Steve.
Because it served its narrative purpose.
But a fully realized world has a pulse outside of the main character's pulse.
But it does have a pulse. It operates exactly as a terrified buffer town on the edge of a totalitarian regime should operate.
Really, where do we see that?
Think about the scene when Xeonix actually goes down to the marketplace. The vendors are incredibly cagey. They awkwardly deflect his questions about the outside world. They won't make eye contact.
I guess.
That isn't just sleepy town writing. That is the hallmark of a populace living under the systemic fear of Eon Pax's surveillance state. They aren't hollow. They are terrified. That is a functioning, breathing political reality playing out in the background, whether Xeonix realizes it or not.
It's a convenient political reality, though, because it requires very little ink on the page to pull off.
What do you mean?
It is easy to write a quiet town and say, oh, well, they're quiet because they're scared. But let's look at the broader geography, because this is where the world-building defense really starts to thin out for me. Look at the Orion lands themselves.
What's wrong with the Orion lands?
They act as a massive billboard for a world that hasn't actually been built yet.
Oh, come on.
No, really. The text constantly uses this sweeping, epic phrasing, right? The Orion lands. It sounds like this vast, majestic, historically rich territory.
Because it is.
But we never actually explore it in detail. We get Xeonix's little isolated hill in Sacar. We get that brief trip to the KG marketplace you just mentioned. And then, boom, we are out.
Right, they have to leave.
It is a classic hallmark of plot-serving scenery. You give a region a massive, epic name to trick the reader into thinking the world is huge, but you don't bother doing the architectural work to actually construct the towns, the roads, the culture.
Look, I understand why the lack of a guided tour through the Orion lands feels frustrating, but a world doesn't have to be mapped inch by inch on the page to be fully realized in its mechanics.
It helps, though.
Sure, but the fact that the Orion lands are vast and largely unseen actually adds to the isolation of Sacar. It makes the world feel incredibly expansive. And when the author does spend ink on a location, the ecological logic is stunning.
Stunning?
Yes. Let's look at the Xaolyn timber forest.
Ah, yes, the forest. This is exactly where the seams really pull apart for me.
How can you say that? The Xaolyn timber forest is where the biological reality of Picodesh is at its most profound.
I completely disagree.
Consider the Earth Heart Stone, the Infinity Crest. It isn't just some shiny relic sitting on a pedestal waiting for the heroes to protect it. It is the literal biological anchor of the entire forest ecosystem.
It's tucked way deep within the sacred mystic heart oak.
Exactly. And Neo Gentrics explains exactly how that symbiotic relationship works. The stone acts as a thermodynamic regulator for the elemental arts in that specific biome.
Right.
The root system of the heart oak draws kinetic potential directly from the Infinity Crest and disperses it into the soil. If that stone is removed, that biological anchor is violently severed.
So the text claims.
The text is incredibly clear. The elemental balance collapses, and the soil immediately turns to ash. The forest physically dies. That is a profound living symbiosis. Picodesh has a thermodynamic equilibrium that exists entirely independent of the human character's feelings.
That is a great explanation of the mechanics, sure. But have you considered how incredibly convenient that exact patch of woods is for the narrative architecture?
Convenient how?
The Xaolyn timber forest doesn't actually feel like a breathing, autonomous ecosystem. It feels like a specialized arena built specifically for Xeon clerics and Iolite to have their dramatic rift.
The setting elevates the conflict, though.
No, it manufactures the conflict. Iolite tries to steal the Infinity Crest simply because the plot requires him to cross a moral event horizon so he can become a villain.
Well,
The forest is just a theatrical stage for that betrayal to take place. If the forest was a real place with a real history, we wouldn't see such glaring foundational errors in how it's documented.
foundational errors? Like what?
Yes. Let me point to a massive piece of textual evidence that shatters this whole illusion of meticulous, century-old house world building. Throughout Book 1, Neo Gentrics interchangeably refers to the guardians of this forest as both the Xaolyn mystics and the Orion mystics.
Well, right, the text does use both terms.
It is a glaring naming inconsistency. In one chapter, they are the Xaolyn mystics protecting the Xaolyn timber forest. In another, they are suddenly the Orion mystics.
I don't think that's an error.
This isn't some deep geopolitical mystery. It is textual proof that Neo Gentrics isn't tracking the world carefully once the cameras aren't strictly on the two leads. The universe Bible is fraying at the edges. He forgot what he named his own faction.
See, I completely reject that framing.
You think it was intentional?
Instead of viewing that dual nomenclature simply as a sloppy authorial error, let's look at it as a brilliant insight into the world building. Neo Gentrics isn't making a mistake, he is showing us how history and borders are fractured.
Oh, come on.
In a fully realized world, names drift. We know for a fact that the Congo War violently redrew the geopolitical borders of Picodesh.
So you think a continuity error is actually a reflection of colonial map drawing?
Yes, it's an incredibly realistic detail. It reflects a cultural schism, a translation drift over time, or a literal geopolitical dispute over where the borders of the Orion lands actually end.
That is a huge leap.
Think about it. Perhaps the forest originally belonged to the Orion lands before the Congo War, so the term Orion mystics is an ancestral designation used by the older generations, or political traditionalists, while Xaolyn mystics is a more modern, localized term adopted post-war.
I mean, maybe, but
Just like in our real world, two different factions or generations might call the exact same geographic region by two different names depending on their political alignment. Neo Gentrics is using an unreliable narrator for the map itself.
you are doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting for the author right now. You are inventing an entire off-page geopolitical border dispute to cover up what is fundamentally a typo.
It's not a typo.
If Neo Gentrics meant for that to represent a cultural schism, we would see the friction of that schism on the page. The characters would actually argue about the proper terminology. A younger mystic would correct an older mystic. But we don't see that.
But
We just see the names inexplicably swapped in the narration. It requires the reader to fill in way too many gaps with their own mortar.
intelligent enough to infer the cultural fallout of the Congo War is a strength, not a weakness.
Well, if we want to talk about the structural physics of Picodesh, let's talk about the laws of the universe, because this is my strongest point regarding the underlying architecture.
All right.
A fully realized world has laws of physics that apply equally to everyone, right? Gravity doesn't just work for the hero.
I agree completely. And we established that in our last debate. The elemental arts exact a real biological cost on everyone who uses them.
But look at the most consequential mechanic in the entire universe, the fundamental physics of time and space.
Okay.
There is a strict, undeniable canon rule established in Book 1. Only Xeonix travels through time, nobody else, ever.
That is canonical, yes. The temporal fold is entirely exclusive to him.
Which completely proves my point. A universe whose core physics bend for exactly one person is by definition plot-serving scenery.
I wouldn't say it bends just for him.
Think about the mechanics of what actually happens. Zeryl literally creates a localized vacuum in the void. He tears a hole in the fabric of space to fold time itself.
Right.
And instead of that causing a catastrophic random spatial anomaly that affects the whole continent, the universe politely ruptures just enough to let Xeonix drop perfectly into the mud of the Congo War, right in front of his grandfather, Xeonix.
Which brings him where he needs to be.
Exactly, so he can get the exact emotional closure he needs to move the plot forward.
It is an incredibly powerful scene.
It's a convenient scene. If Eon Pax can't time travel, if Iolite can't time travel, if Kenshin can't do it, then time travel isn't a law of physics in Picodesh. It is a VIP pass printed exclusively for Xeonix.
Well,
The universe is actively, demonstrably catering to him. If the world was a century-old house, anyone who figured out how to use Zeryl could clear that hole in space. But they can't, because the plywood is painted just for the protagonist.
I absolutely love how you frame the mechanics of Zeryl there, but I am still not convinced by the conclusion.
Why not?
Because you are entirely ignoring what is happening on a macro scale outside of that one temporal anomaly. You want proof that Picodesh doesn't simply cater to Xeonix. You want proof that the physics and the economy operate independently of the hero.
Yes, please.
Look at the harvesting economy of Eon Pax's empire.
The Empire is the antagonist faction. Of course it does bad things. It has to set up the plot so the hero has something to fight.
But it doesn't just do bad things in a generic cartoon villain way. It operates systematically, completely independent of the hero's personal journey. Let's look at how the harvesting economy actually works.
Okay.
Eon Pax isn't just conquering dirt to expand borders. He is running an industrial-scale biological mining operation. He is literally siphoning the biological energy, the kinetic potential out of subjugated populations to power his war machines.
It's a brutal system, I'll give you that.
It is structural terror. When Crater Steve burns down the estate in Sacar, Xeonix's younger brothers Milo and Florent vanish in the smoke.
Right.
They aren't just kidnapped to make Xeonix sad. They are fed into a systemic, demographic engineering pipeline. Eon Pax launders the youth of powerful bloodlines, extracting their latent elemental capabilities to fuel his empire.
Sure.
That has absolutely nothing to do with catering to Xeonix. That proves Picodesh has a thriving, terrifying political economy that operates on a massive scale.
A political economy that just happens to be very convenient for creating personal emotional stakes for the protagonist by taking his brothers.
It is far more than just convenient. Treating human biological capability as a raw resource to be mined is a profoundly sophisticated structural choice. It explains the economic fallout of the Congo War. It explains why the mystics were nearly eradicated from the Xaolyn timber forest.
It does connect those threads, yes?
Eon Pax's industrial machinery churns, whether Xeonix is carving wood on a hill in Sacar or folding time with Zeryl. The systemic violence is real. It requires logistics, it requires supply chains, it requires terrorizing populations. That proves the continent is alive, complex, and bleeding.
You know, I will concede that the harvesting economy is a highly effective piece of world-building stakes. I really will.
Thank you.
The mechanics of Eon Pax treating human kinetic potential as a mineable resource, specifically the implication that he ensnares boys like Milo and Florent to systematically weaponize their latent lineage, that gives Picodesh real, chilling political depth.
Exactly.
It elevates the conflict far beyond just good guys versus bad guys. It creates a literal economy of violence. So I admit, that part of the world feels undeniably structurally real.
I appreciate that concession, because I think the harvesting economy is really the beating heart of the world's darkness. And to be perfectly fair to your perspective, I must concede that the unmapped nature of the Orion lands really does leave parts of the continent feeling like a billboard.
Right? It just feels a bit empty.
It does. And combining that geographic ambiguity with the naming inconsistency between the Xaolyn mystics and Orion mystics, well, it does make the world feel unpolished when the narrative lens moves away from Xeonix.
Yeah.
You were right earlier. If Neo Gentrics truly wanted us to perceive a historical cultural schism based on the Congo War, the text needed to do a bit more heavy lifting to establish that friction. As it stands, it requires the reader to fill in too many gaps.
It does. It asks a lot of the audience to smooth over those seams.
So, as we bring this discussion to a close, we find ourselves sitting right in the middle of a really fascinating tension within the text of Book 1.
Definitely.
On one hand, we have this deeply realized biological economy of the elemental arts. We have a world where ancient ecosystems rely on intricate, symbiotic anchors like the Infinity Crest, and where an empire systematically harvests human kinetic potential across an entire continent.
But on the other hand, we have undeniably convenient staging. We have physical locations that exist seemingly just to facilitate emotional beats for the leads, and a universe that restricts its most profound, reality-breaking mechanic, time travel via Zeryl, exclusively to its protagonist.
Exactly. And honestly, reflecting on the value of looking at the text through both of these perspectives, it becomes clear that understanding both the brilliance of the systemic world building and the occasional structural flaws only deepens our appreciation of Neo Gentrics' work.
I completely agree.
There is always more to explore, more to question, and more to appreciate when we look past the surface of the architecture.
And we certainly aren't here to declare a winner today. The listener has to form their own conclusion about the reality of Picodesh. Does it stand on its own solid foundation, or is it propped up by 2x4s for the camera?
That is a question every reader has to answer for themselves as they explore Book 1. And speaking of questions, you won't want to miss our next discussion. Join us for episode 19 as we debate what's the single best twist in Book 1.
Oh, I already know exactly which one I'm bringing to the table, and you are going to absolutely hate it.
I'm sure I will. Until then, the next time you open a book and step into a new environment, ask yourself, are you walking into a real, breathing house, or are you just admiring a beautifully painted piece of plywood?